The reading this morning is from Luke chapter 10, verses 30 to 36. Jesus has been asked a question, and here is his answer. Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers, who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now, by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while travelling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, 'Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spent.' Which of these 3 do you think was neighbour to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers?" This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. A Samaritan passed and saw the man lying on the road, and he had compassion on him. By rights, he should have finished the job that the robbers began and killed the man. Why? Because he was his enemy. He was a Jew. And the man walking past was a Samaritan. They were sworn enemies. Yet he acts as a friend. Friend or enemy? How shall we view others who are opposed to us? I will return to this question. This morning I have some news for you. Some good news, some bad news. I'm going to begin with the good news. The good news. People do not like killing other people, regardless of who they are. And even when they are the enemy, people do not like killing other people. Several studies have shown that even in war, a significant proportion of soldiers deliberately aim to miss. Even when coerced, a significant proportion deliberately aim to miss. That is good news. In homage to Catalonia, George Orwell's account of his time fighting with the international brigades in the Spanish Civil War in the late 1930s, he relates this incident. "I was part of a group of soldiers, and we saw some fascists outside their trenches. I took careful aim at one of them, but immediately noticed that he had been relieving himself and was running away, holding his pants with his hands. I could not bring myself to shoot him. At that moment, he was not a fascist. He was visibly a fellow human. Humans find it difficult to kill others, thanks be to God. That is the good news. Now, for the bad news. That innate resistance to killing can be broken down by propaganda. We humans are vulnerable to violence against others. When the societies in which we live, the governments and the opinion leaders that we look to, when they shape our perceptions of the other in particular ways. And that shaping always runs the risk of becoming propaganda. I have a hunch that today, in some ways, we are more susceptible to propaganda than ever before in human history, because we have so much information and so many images. Pictures often work better than words, by the way, as you can see from the picture in front of you. So we hear about others, but we can never possibly meet them. And the power of propaganda is it ceases to be a view out there, it becomes your view. And therefore it's true. But you've never met the person or the nation about whom we think badly. Propaganda depicts a stereotype of a whole nation, a whole group of people as negative and degrading. It caricatures them as gross or deformed, and at worst, it makes them into animals. And it's a lot easier to kill an animal than it is another human. And we like things to be black or white, to be good or bad. We are always the goodies, and it is the others who are the baddies. The American philosopher Sam Kean, whom I quoted last week, tells the story of his grandson, who approached him one day and said, Grandpa, tell me a story and make sure there are some bad guys in it, and they'll get what's coming to them. And it resonated with an experience I had early in ministry when I told a story to a group of children in church. And one of them, a bit cheekily, said, "This is so boring. They're all good guys. Where are the bad guys? The bad guys make it interesting." That's the way we think. And propaganda feeds into that directly. One of the worst forms of propaganda was propagated by the Nazis against the Jews. A horrendous movie claiming to be a documentary called Der ewige Jude, the Eternal Jew, or the Wandering Jew. Can you see his face? Set aside for a moment what we know about the history and the horror, and how do you respond to that face? I cringe. That's how propaganda works. Of the Japanese. It says if you worked as hard and fast as a Jap, we'd smash Tokyo a lot quicker. But the important thing is, look at his face. He's subhuman. And note too, his skin colour. You notice that baddies are nearly always painted in dark colours. Why? Because we like to think we're white. The power is in the picture, in the image. Or a more recent example, this is actually a cartoon that was drawn in Austria just in the last few months about the influx of Syrian refugees. And can you see the little creatures on the ground? What are they? Rats. What do you do with rats? You exterminate them. There's the image. Syrian refugees are rats. The same image was used by the Nazis of the Jews, by the way. What do you do with a rat? You exterminate it. The bad news is that our perceptions can be manipulated and influenced, and we are prone to seeing enemies because of the way we think. Or to use the words that I used from Sam Keane last week, we stain the strangers with the sinister hues of shadows. And when your icon of the enemy is complete, you will be able to kill without guilt, to slaughter without shame. The thing you destroy will have become merely an enemy of God. Vermin to be exterminated. Friends, there is some more good news. The power of the gospel is that it deconstructs such propaganda, and it renders everyone, you, me, colleagues, people in our community, strangers, and especially enemies, renders everyone as a child of God. Everyone is rendered as a child of God. The good news is that that process of propaganda can be reversed. And Sam Keane has said, when you change the way you see the other, you change the way that you see yourself. Jesus understood that 2,000 years before Sam Keane did his research. The parable of the outrageous Samaritan. It's not about kindness. It's not about goodness. It's not about being helpful. It's not about being a good neighbour. It's about the enemy. The Samaritan in the first century was the enemy. The rabbis taught that Jews could not speak to Samaritans, that they could not travel in their territory, and stories were spread that Samaritans came into the temple in Jerusalem and scattered bones in it, which rendered the whole temple unclean and impure. They were disgusting because they desecrated sacred sites. When Jesus first told the parable, we should imagine that the hearers immediately pictured the Samaritans in terms of what we would now call propaganda. And if I can give you a reading of what was possibly going through their minds, when Jesus says, "Then a Samaritan came along and saw the man," the response would have been, "Uh-oh, he's going to be finished off now. He's in real trouble." They would have seen someone like that. They are ISIS fighters. That's what the Jewish listeners would have seen. Not that they are current day Samaritans, but that. And then it is the enemy who is the compassionate one. Can you see what's happening? It's deconstructing propaganda. For us to understand the power of it, you need to substitute for the Samaritan an ISIS fighter. How does that play out for you? Imagine yourself lying by the side of the road, having been attacked. And then an ISIS fighter comes down the road. What happens in your mind and heart? Let that play out in your imagination, and you will understand again the power of the gospel. Jesus deconstructs the propaganda about enemies. The enemy becomes human, humane, equal in dignity and worth. No longer an enemy, but a fellow human. You can make war against a subhuman enemy, against vermin. History demonstrates that quite clearly. You can't make war against a fellow human. The power of the gospel is that it deconstructs propaganda. It renders everyone as a child of God. So, friends, what's the good news? The good news is that God has given you an imagination. You can use your imagination to construct a very different world than the one we currently live in. Fund that imagination with the stories of Jesus. Fill it with parables where enemies become friends. Make it colourful. And then dare to have the faith to live out that hope for the world in which your enemy is your friend. And in that way, you become a peacemaker. Blessed are the peacemakers. They will be called children of God. In that way, we honour God, who is the God of peace. Amen.